we are really, really excited to have Colleen and Kimberly here with us today. They are absolutely both wonderful women who work at SAGE in the social work department, and they're going to guide us through housing options for seniors, predominantly independent housing options. So we're really thrilled to have them both. Colleen and Kimberly, I'll give you the floor.
Okay, thanks, Amber. So my name is Kim Punko, and I work as an assessment supports and housing coordinator at SAGE. And so I'll do the first half of the presentation, and then Colleen Derksen will take over. Yeah, so it's great to have everyone with us here. And we'll start answering questions at the end of the presentation, so feel free to write them down, and then we'll get through as many as we can at the end. Okay, so here is a list of the various social work services available through SAGE. So we have an intake phone line, so people can leave a voicemail. As we are working remotely at the moment, we do call back within 2 business days if you have a question. We also provide housing information. There's long-term social work supports. There's the This Full House program, which addresses hoarding behaviors, and Colleen and I work in that as well. There's a guardianship and trusteeship program. And then there's the Multicultural Seniors Outreach Program. Here's a list of other services available at SAGE. So there is the Life Enrichment Program. And this program is all about fun and lifelong learning. You can find the calendar. It's updated regularly. You just go to the online programs area and you can find out the different activities available. So there's things like yoga or Zumba or ukulele or different craft groups if you're interested. There's also the Safe House, and this is a shelter for seniors who are 60 years or older who are experiencing elder abuse. And then there's also the Income Tax Clinic, and this is still available if you haven't filed your taxes for this year. It is a free service. There is an income threshold, but it's completed over the phone by one of our amazing volunteers. So if you haven't filed your taxes yet, feel free to call our intake line. Okay, so I'm going to go into the housing program, which is the reason why everyone's here. And so Colleen and I were going to discuss independent living options. And the reason, so there's 3 different areas. There's independent living, and then supportive living, and then the assisted facility living. So we're not going to go too much into that, just because for assisted and facility living, there's private options, and then there's ones through Alberta Health Services, but the referrals or the assessment has to come through Alberta Health Services. So the different coordinators at SAGE can provide various information. So we can discuss the different housing options and review the application process and help with the actual application as well if necessary. We provide information on how to navigate the system and how to use the directory, as it is a very good resource. So there's many places you can pick this up in the city for free. They have them usually at the various senior centers, at different grocery stores, at AMA. If you're having difficulty finding it, you can again phone the intake line and we can let you know the closest option for you to pick it up. Unfortunately, some seniors are experiencing homelessness. So we do work to ideally prevent it if we can and try to advocate with the landlord and figure out if there's any additional options for seniors. We also, as part of the assessment process, we do try to look and see if seniors have maximized their income sources. So we go over the different ones that might be eligible for, and if necessary, then help seniors apply for those as well. And then monthly, we try to do a check-in with the different housing bodies so that we're aware of any changes and that we can provide accurate and timely information. So when you're thinking of potentially moving to different housing, there's different things to consider. And these are the major ones. So I'll go into more detail shortly, but this gives you an idea of things to maybe consider. So things such as safety, finances, location, and support. So I'm going to refer to the directory a few times. So if you, I don't know if you have it with you, but on page 246 and 247 near the back of it, there's something called the to move or not move checklist. And this is a handy thing to start the process. It's going to come up on the next slide, so we'll take a look at it then. But just maybe if you have the book in front of you, it might be easier to read through it. So again, that's on page 246 and 247. Okay, so this is the checklist I was referring to. So by considering these 4 areas, it might give you a realistic picture of your current and future housing situation. For safety-wise, some things to consider is your home still suitable and is it still safe? For instance, can you manage the stairs? Can you easily get outside? Can you get down to the basement? Are there risks of falls or trips? And then with housing, always, can you easily do the indoor repairs? And are you able to manage the cleaning of the home? And what about the outside? Things like snow shoveling is important to consider, yard work, outside maintenance. Does your home have good lighting? Do you need safety bars or handrails? Is your flooring safe? And then just in case of illness or injury, do you have an emergency response system in place? Okay, so the next area is finance, another important area to consider. So currently, is the choice to stay in your home, is it financially sound? Is it realistic? So can you still easily afford to pay things like your rent or mortgage, the upkeep of your place, pay for repairs that are coming up, taxes, insurance, and utilities? And is the home affordable? And then try to think of what major or even minor repairs need to be done in the future. Do you have an emergency fund or money set aside for renovations or adaptations? And do you qualify for financial assistance for this? And I'll go into the different programs that you might want to look into, see if you qualify for the different programs. And then another thing to think about is, would freeing up equity in your home allow you to have a more enjoyable lifestyle in retirement? The next thing to consider is location. Is your current location of your home suitable? For instance, can you access going to your doctor, going to the post office, getting to the grocery store easily? Do you have access to adequate transportation? So now that ETS has changed the routes, is this still a feasible way for you to get around? What happens if you can't drive anymore? Can you use public transportation? Do you need to consider taking DATs or other seniors driving services such as Drive Happiness? And then how connected do you feel to your community? And then finally, support services. So can you access the following services to do with cleaning, yard work, repairs, home delivered meals, groceries, personal care services, and home care? So many, many important things to consider if you're thinking about possibly staying in your home or moving. Okay, so a good thing to do is to consider the positives and negatives for those 4 things. So for location, finances, safety, and support services, to really try to weigh them out. And then also to step back and try to do a practical and honest evaluation. So when we think of home, especially we've been there for years, there's a lot of memories and nostalgia tied into this. And it could be that you raised children there, or you hosted dinners, or your neighbors. So it can be difficult to think about moving, but it's important to try to think practically about your situation as much as possible. At the same time, it's good to look into the different supports, grants, loans available to seniors. So one of them to maybe considered is called the RAMP program. And this is available through Government of Alberta. It stands for the Residential Access Modification Program. So it's a program that is geared to try to make homes more accessible for seniors. And then there's the SHARP program, which is a grant or loan program, again, through Alberta government. And it stands for the Seniors Home Adaptation and Repair Program. And then finally, the Alberta Aids to Daily Living, which allows low-income seniors to afford medical equipment that they might not be able to access otherwise. So there's quite a few eligibility requirements with these programs, so definitely look them up and see if you meet the eligibility requirements. And one thing I was going to mention as well, as one thing to keep in mind is it's through Alberta Seniors Benefit. There is a housekeeping and yard work benefit as well for $1,200. So that might be something to double check if you're eligible for that program as well. Okay, so once you've made the decision to move, then there's many things to think about. So what type of housing would work for you? What services would you like to access? What is your budget? That's important to consider. So for low-income seniors, they might be eligible for subsidized housing options. And this means that your rent is based on 30% of your monthly income. And so what they look at is line 150 of your most recent tax assessment. So again, filing your taxes is very important. So agencies that offer subsidized housing in Edmonton are Greater Edmonton Foundation, Vista Housing, and Operation Friendship. So income limits can vary, but for the most part, the income limits for a bachelor unit is 36,000. For a single person, it's 42,000 for a one bedroom, and then for 53,000 for a couple. So one thing to keep in mind is if you are hoping to relocate, it's good to start the process early rather than later. So thinking about and planning to move before you need to means you'll have more options available to you and a better chance of a good fit. And the reason we're saying this is that the majority of places have waiting lists. So try to find something you like, and then be aware that there might be a wait time for the move. So another thing to consider are the possible triggers that might come up for you. Things that we can't predict. As we're going through a pandemic, we're experiencing a lot of changes. So everyone's situation can change quite quickly. So some things to consider: are you at risk for an eviction or a foreclosure? Based on your retirement income, can you afford your current mortgage and rent and living expenses? So another thing, people are living longer these days. So can you be at risk of outliving your retirement savings? So sitting down with a financial planner might be a good idea to take advantage of. No longer being able to do your own cleaning, cooking, or maintenance due to illness or injury. And let's say you would want to move, but you can't sell your house quickly. Can you consider renting it out for a while or living elsewhere? So it's always good to have a backup, a plan B, just in case, and to just consider all options available to you. Another thing to consider is downsizing. So seniors' apartments are quite a bit smaller. So trying to move everything in a home into an apartment is going to be very, very difficult. So when you look through the directory, some places actually list the square footage that's available in the buildings. Something to consider. And the process of downsizing can be a very emotional thing to go through. You're going through your entire life and you're going to have to try to either let go of some items or give them away to other people. So it can be difficult to make these decisions at times. So what would be your plan for doing that? Who can help you? What will you do with the things that you no longer want or need? And can you afford to hire a company that helps with downsizing, packing, or moving? And there are various companies that are available to help with these things. And then lastly, location. So what area would you like to relocate to and why? So which area of the city do you like? What amenities do you want to have close by? Where are the nearest medical centers, pharmacies, grocery stores, and rec centers? Is transportation, again, is it accessible? And then consider the risk of becoming socially isolated due to location and take steps to prevent it. So one thing that might be a good idea is to find listings in the directory that are in the area that you like, and then go check out the neighborhoods and get a feel for what it's like there. Okay, and just a couple other life considerations. We all love our pets, but at certain seniors buildings, they do not accept pets, unfortunately. So again, in the directory, it lists which buildings are pet friendly and which ones aren't. For subsidized housing operators, Greater Edmonton Foundation does allow pets, but it's good to review their pet policy. There's certain rules that they have in place. For instance, one of the rules is that you have to have had the pet for at least 3 years. So it's a good idea to maybe consult with them and find out exactly what the rules are before making a choice. Most other buildings don't allow pets, so it's just something to keep in mind. And for the ones that do, there is going to be a pet deposit or a pet fee involved. For parking, many buildings do not have parking or it is very limited. If there is parking available, you can expect there to be an additional monthly charge. Nowadays, most facilities are non-smoking. So they do have designated smoking areas outside, but smoking is not allowed in the buildings. And then lastly, communal living can be quite difficult to control. So having allergies to carpet cleaning products, perfumes, scents, and other allergens, something to keep in mind when you move into a communal space. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Colleen Derksen for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Kim. Well, as you can see, a lot to consider when making your decision. So I'm going to speak about some of the options available during the next part of the presentation. And we'll start with purchasing options. So the possibility of purchasing a smaller house or space is one way to downsize and potentially cut your costs. And some of the options could be a condominium, whether it's purchasing a condominium or a life lease. A life lease can be a little bit confusing. I'll explain it, the basic premise of it. It's similar to owning a condominium with a few minor differences. A life lease means that you buy a leasehold apartment with a deposit of 35 to 100% of the suite's value. So if your deposit is less than the suite's full value, there's a monthly rental for the unpaid portion. So for example, if a suite is valued at 300,000, rent might be set at 2,500. But if you put 50% down, it could bring the rent down significantly, possibly by $700, etc. So, I mean, those numbers are all negotiable depending on the amount of what your deposit is. However, that gives you a general idea of how that kind of works. And then, of course, you're also responsible for the upkeep of your personal property, including repairs and maintenance within your suite. Typically, like condos, there's an additional monthly fee for maintenance of common areas and services. So those are some things to consider, though you will technically own your space, you will still be paying a portion for upkeep in fees and in rent, depending on the amount of your deposits. So it requires a little bit of figuring and budgeting to be able to decide whether that's a viable option for you. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about independent living and how rent is calculated and what to expect. So we'll talk about subsidized and affordable buildings. We'll talk about the income and rent in those buildings. We'll talk about their pet and smoking policies, the age range in which you can apply, availability, and then any kind of a deposit that's required for those buildings. So subsidized, as Kim touched on earlier in the presentation, subsidized rent is geared towards your individual income. And affordable rent is determined as rent that is the same for everyone in similar units, but is typically 10 or 20% below market value. So income limits for both subsidized and affordable rent are based on rates set out by the Alberta government's core need income threshold. And again, it's that line 150 of your notice of assessment. So as your income rises, so does the rent. So for example, if you were cashing in some RSPs during a certain year, that would reflect on your income, and then that would also reflect on your rent for the coming year. So back to stressing getting your taxes done. It's important for all applications as well as pensions. So apartment owners will insist on seeing your taxes to determine what your next year's rent will be based on. So as mentioned, 2 of the government pensions depend on these taxes being completed on time. So you want to ensure that they are, so that you don't receive a dip in your income and then suddenly have to negotiate with your landlord because your income has decreased but rent has stayed the same. And it is a very frustrating process to reinstate those pensions. They don't do it automatically, and they don't do it quite very quickly. So we want to ensure that you can avoid that if possible. And of course, as Kim mentioned, we have a free income tax program over at Sage. During tax season, it operates with a lot of volunteers because of the volume of requests, but we certainly still have some dedicated volunteers that assist year round as well. So things to expect: operators will want a tenancy history and contact with previous landlords if applicable. So we say applicable, obviously, if you've been a homeowner and you're moving into an apartment, you won't have a rental history, and they'll take that into an account. But they may also ask for a medical report stating that you can in fact live independently. The medical reports that most housing providers request are not extremely detailed. It is really just to determine your level of independence so that you're a fit for their apartment buildings. So next we'll talk about pets and smoking. So overall, most subsidized seniors housing does not allow for pets. Greater Edmonton Foundation has recently changed their policy where they do allow for certain pets that meet certain criteria. However, typically there will be an added fee for this. And like I said, you won't be able to bring 5 Great Danes in with you to your new apartment. And we understand that, of course, pet considerations are a huge issue for seniors when they're making the decision about where to move. Many people decide to move into a market rental apartment just because the restrictions around pets are less than they would be in subsidized housing. Smoking. Well, just assume all of these buildings are non-smoking. Some of them will have smoking sections outside the building. However, I will say, if you're going into an apartment with the idea that you may be able to smoke on the balcony or etc., that is not tolerated. They will start eviction notices quite quickly. So be prepared to smoke outside or not at all. Minimum age. So when we talk about age range, most are strictly 65 plus. They really don't want you to apply and go on a waiting list until you are 65. We'll put a little bit of a caveat here. If you see Vista housing buildings in the directory, sometimes they mention that they are 63 plus, but just assume going in that they are 65. They sometimes open up their age range, but currently it is 65 plus. They really open that age range quite seldomly. And there are about 10 providers in the directory that are 55 or 60 up for subsidized or affordable rates. So in addition, there are also some veteran centers that are 55 plus, but of course, they will be giving priority to veterans. Next, we'll speak a little bit about availability. There's typically a waiting list, so it's a good idea to apply as early as you can. Wait times can vary from building to building. It kind of depends, it kind of depends on the building itself. Some just have higher turnaround than others. And applicants are prioritized based on a need level. So there's an ability on subsidized housing application for you to put a little bit of an explanation around your circumstances. So they will be prioritizing people who are in real danger of homelessness. So if, for example, your lease is about to expire or you are in fact being evicted from an apartment, you would be put a little higher on their waiting list. But basically, aside from that, it would be first come, first serve kind of thing. Damage deposit, typically required. You can basically budget for what first month's rent. However, there are seniors discounts at some of the subsidized housing providers, so it's well worth an inquiry, but it's also important to factor into your budget. So what to expect in a private market rental. So when we speak of private market rental, it is really just what it sounds like. It's what's available on the market for rent. And so for these types of rentals, no income or rent restrictions apply. Landlords will likely do a credit check, however, and they will need income verification. So a notice of assessment is typically proof of income. The downside is that the rent will likely go up each time your lease is finished, and the amount can be quite significant. If you are on a limited income, you may not be able to keep living there indefinitely. In Alberta, landlords are allowed to raise rent indiscriminately in terms of percentages. So it might be, as mentioned, quite a large increase that you're looking at after your lease expires. Pets and smoking. So this varies from building to building. So if you have pets and you can't bear to let them go, this might be a better option for you. But remember, there's that pet deposit, and often can also be an additional monthly fee for tacked onto your rent in order to keep your pet. So the age range is going to vary from building to building. There are some private seniors apartment buildings, but most don't have age limits. So be aware that you may be in a building with children, teenagers, students, young adults who may be at the staying up late stage, and that might make for a lousier, or it's louder, not lousier, louder living environment than you had expected. Availability, well, typically there's no wait list, or it can be much shorter wait than subsidized or affordable housing. It's kind of based on market availability. So in Edmonton, sometimes it's a renter's market, and sometimes it's called what we call it a landlord's market. So it kind of depends on, and that can be seasonal as well. Damage deposit is usually equivalent to 1 month's rent. Many private apartment managers offer reduced damage deposit rates and other move-in incentives for seniors. So it's a good thing to ask about. Maybe something as a reduction in rent for a certain amount of time if you sign a year lease, maybe a bit of a reduction in cable costs. It's worth inquiring about. So supportive living. So supportive living is defined as an accommodation in a home-like setting where people can remain as independent as possible while they have access to services that meet their changing needs. Supportive living also meets the needs of a wide range of people, but not those with highly complex and serious health needs. So it provides basic hospitality services such as meals, at least 1 meal a day, housekeeping, laundry service, life enrichment services like games, classes, etc. And those are all arranged by the housing operator. And there's also a common area or areas for meals, social functions, etc. So I'm going to refer you back to the list that we touched on earlier today, this checklist. This is in the directory. It's on 246, 247. It's a handy tool to use when you are comparing facilities so that you know what kind of services they offer, possibly what kind of extra fees are involved. And it gives you the ability to compare units with each or buildings with each other so that you're not getting confused after numerous phone calls. So you're going to be evaluating your needs in terms of, is supportive living right for you right now? And will it meet your changing needs? So again, when we look on that checklist, that move or not to move checklist originally, you know, you may be wanting to revisit some of those future needs so that you can ensure that your the facility you're choosing is going to be a good fit for you in the future as well. So you're going to be, again, considering those issues of safety, finances, location, and support services. So in terms of safety, is your current situation unsafe for you physically, emotionally, mentally? Is your home safe and suitable for you to stay in? Are you at risk for falls? Are you able to manage the stairs in your home? Do you have emergency contacts handy? And what might be triggering the move? Again, we're talking about those finances now and in the future. What can you afford? And of course, location. Do you have adequate transportation available for medical appointments, social activities, visiting friends and family? And does the neighborhood please you? Is the location of your current home suitable in terms of accessing supports and services? And what amenities and services do you want in the building, both now and in the future? Do you have access to the supports and services you need in your current home? Are friends and family willing to help? If not, do you have the funds available to pay for somebody to help? And is organizing all of this becoming too much? When do you want to move? Again, the sooner you plan, the better. Again, there's that handy document to be able to take a look to ensure the safety in your home. So now we're talking about what are our options? Well, there's a bit of a gray area in between lodge and public supportive living. So we're going to touch on that a bit. We'll talk about the definition. We'll talk about subsidized lodges versus private lodges and some of the services that they're provided. I think there's a little confusion around from what we experience in the housing line in terms of what a lodge and supportive living really does mean. So a definition for seniors who are functionally independent with or without the help of community-based services. Example, home care. Public supportive living is operated under the Alberta Housing Act. So that would be defined as a lodge, but it is also considered independent. There's a certain level of independence required to be able to move into a community-based lodge, but it's considered supportive living. So typically you would have a private sitting room, and then you'd go to common areas for your meals and activities. So a lodge is also responsible for organizing services you need that are not provided or that are provided. So typically that would include housekeeping, meals. Sometimes there's the ability for laundry service as well. But you would be responsible in a subsidized lodge for transportation services, that kind of thing, and some of those extra supports. But they also can include, an opportunity for recreational and social opportunities. Sometimes when seniors are looking at where they want to transition to, they want to ensure that they're not being isolated in the new place that they move to. And an independent apartment doesn't necessarily always afford you the ability to get to know your neighbors, the ability to socialize with your neighbors, or to participate in activities that interest you. A lodge is a good option for those people who are hoping to, maybe get a social aspect out of their living environment. So subsidized lodges typically cost 30% of your monthly income for rent, and then you would be paying a service fee. The service fee is going to cover those additional services. So that would include your meals, laundry services, housekeeping, but they typically are operated through the Seniors Lodge program, which is administered by the Alberta Municipal Affairs program. So that means they are required to leave you at least $315 a month in disposable income after all those expenses are incurred. And they also prioritize applicants based on need. And so there are a number of lodges that participate in the subsidized program. Most of those are run through the Greater Edmonton Foundation. And the SAGE directory also lists the lodges that do not participate in this program. So obviously private lodges are certainly available, and they would provide these services as well. However, the fees can be higher because your rent will not be determined by your income. So the rent could be $1,000, and then you would be paying for fees on top of it. So you can see that it really depends on what your budget will provide for. So some added features that might be of assistance for you are, they'll offer a security system. They'll offer wheelchair accessibility, the recreation rooms, computer stations, library, perhaps a hair salon. Sometimes they're part of a multi-level facility. So that means you could have various stages of support within the same complex. Or they will be close to another complex. For example, Beverly Place Lodge is co-located with Porta Place Apartments. So these are both Greater Edmonton Foundation buildings. Porta Place, you can live independently, but if your needs increase, you could transition to their lodge. And again, some private lodges may have fees comparable to public lodges, but it's a matter of doing some comparison shopping. So we'll talk a little bit more about the private supportive living. There's a variety of options out there. Different facilities provide different services and different levels of care. So 1 meal a day versus 3. Some have a bus to drive people to appointments and some others do not. Obviously, this comes with a variety of prices. So prices are not regulated for these buildings. So you'll have to be quite diligent in asking about any added fees. What exactly is rent and how long will it stay like this? What is a typical rent increase to be able to budget accordingly? But because they often charge additional fees for extra services like the housekeeping and the snacks. And it's important to plan and budget for increases over time. That can be a real shock coming in the years ahead if you find that a rent increase also comes with a fees and service increase. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have a couple of things that I just want to quickly add about private supportive living because I still have a couple of minutes left and I feel I should add them. They have their own assessments to determine your level of need and whether or not you can meet those needs in your buildings. So for all of the facilities mentioned, whether it's subsidized or private, there will be an interview process, and sometimes part of that interview process is to determine your ability to live within their facility, whether independently or with supports. So certainly feel free to call our intake and assessment line if you want any assistance in navigating some of the application process or some of the choices out there. It is 587-773-1764, or you can certainly call our main intake. Both of them are going to funnel you to the same answering system. It is 780-423-5510. Thank you so much for your time. And I thank you on behalf of Kim as well. And I think we have a couple of minutes for questions.
Thank you both so much. We actually already have a question in the Q&A chat box, which I can pull up. Colleen or Kim, you both are able to access this too. You'll find the Q&A chat box just at the very bottom of your Zoom toolbar. And if you click that, you'll see a question there. And then there's also a question posed just in our general, or a comment more so in our general chat box as well.
So I'll answer the question in regards to seeing eye dogs. So are you talking about subsidized? Because Greater Edmonton Foundation lodges do allow for pets. So a seeing eye dog would certainly qualify for that. Okay. So public, I'll just answer generally. Public and service dogs, you would probably have to prove that it was a service dog for a public supported facility, but Greater Edmonton Foundation would allow for a seeing eye dog as long as it met with height restrictions. They do have some size restrictions on their pets.
And I'll just read aloud. This is a really great comment from Lucille. Leduc Country FCSS offices also prepare income tax returns for no charge. Individuals can search the Canada Revenue Agency website under community volunteer income tax for offices that participate in the tax preparation program in various communities. Thanks so much for sharing that. And if we don't have any more questions, I think we'll wrap this up. Thank you so much for sharing your contact information. So if there are any further questions, please feel free to reach out to Sage directly. We can put you in touch with the right people. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us. Thank you so much to Colleen and Kimberly for this absolutely fantastic presentation, which was so incredibly informative.